so those later can grab it. So Chris Severs, welcome to your first webinar here with Functional Aging Institute. Go ahead and take it away, buddy.
Hey, thank you very much, Dan, and folks, thank you very much for tuning in. As Dan mentioned, this is my first webinar. I had an amazing time at the Functional Aging Summit, an opportunity to sort of present some of the ideas that I've developed, and I started out with a presentation that gave a little bit of my background. Basically, I'm self-taught when it comes to fitness, if you will. I have a lifetime of playing sports, specifically rugby was my game for many years. Played for 40 years, in fact, and learned a lot about rehabilitating injuries, learned a lot about how to keep quality of movement good, strong, athletic, and then at a certain point in my business career, I opened a spa. And in that spa, I started to train people using some of the ideas that I developed, and got into working with resistance in functional ranges of motion. It was quite an interesting, and it's been quite an interesting journey. I've been at this now, full time for 5 years. I'm at the point where these tools that I've designed have been through 7 generations, 8 generations of prototypes, and worked with a lot of really interesting people. You'll see here as you scroll through a lot of these slides. I worked with the National Ballet of Canada. Yeah, Dan, we'll scroll through just a few of these quickly. Some of these slides, I put these together originally was to sort of show a little bit about some of the lessons I learned playing rugby in terms of what it takes to carry forward an idea, what it takes to carry forward with commitment and passion. You need a lot of things. You need to be able to adapt more than anything else. This was a great moment. Every sport has its moments of truth, and rugby, boy, has a lot of moments of truth. You know.
Love how you get it, and then oh.
Had to turn around, right? Got to keep moving forward, right? Rugby's a great game in terms of life lessons, of course, and it certainly couldn't have been a better sport, I think, to prepare me for what was going to be involved bringing new products to market. At the end of the day, what you're going to be really good at is what you're passionate about. I think that's the thing that I've learned. I'm 60 years old now. My kids are all grown up, and I have really learned as I've driven forward with this particular type of fitness that passion is the key. That's really what sustained me throughout this whole journey. This is a nice little shot, actually, the spa where I first got started. You'll see this logo. I've maintained, I've kept this logo because it's one of the things I think is really important about fitness practice is the idea of mind and body. There's so much value to be gained when you're training, to be able to train outdoors. One of the things I love about Anchor Point training is that you can do this practice anywhere. I train every day, every morning now. I train on the beach here in Long Beach. It's wonderful. So learning how to do a fitness practice like Anchor Point training, where you can do it anywhere in a park or anywhere like that, what a wonderful thing that is, because when you take yourself to an inspiring environment, it just adds so much to what you're going to get out of that time that you spend. More and more of the evidence comes through from the world of positive psychology, and in particular, where we recognize that different practices that we can have that are mind practices, whether it's mindfulness, gratitude. I do a certain amount of laughing yoga when I do my my warm up, my squats. I have a practice I call laughing squats, and it's wonderful. Just doing this hard, heavy laughter while you're warming up with your squats gives you, first of all, ups your endorphins. Okay, so it ups your pain threshold, so you can work out a little harder. And what I find as well, like anything else that you train, if you practice laughter yoga, whatever, then when you have a moment where you're joyful and you're laughing, you laugh stronger, you laugh louder, you laugh harder, you get more enjoyment from your actual laughter. So not only do the laughing squats sort of help you sort of get amped up a little bit for your workout and up your endorphins, but it actually, again, improves your capacity to laugh. So I think there's a lot of things like this, and traditionally in the fitness world, we look at that and go, oh, it's so much of our industry is focused on getting big and buff, and it's either weight loss or putting on mass. It's very geared to aesthetics. Aesthetics are important, no mistake. Of course they are. But there's so much more value we can get out of fitness practice. Anchor point training has all of those ingredients. It has flow. I mean, when you learn how to train with anchor point, with your moving resistance, either elastic resistance or working with suspension, for example, these types of tools really lend themselves to linked moves. They lend themselves to flow. They lend themselves to routines that can go from one exercise to another. And this again, once again, you've got the vocabulary under your belt. Once you understand all the different ways you can move, you can create these wonderful flowing routines that are in and of themselves can be also very progressive. This practice is extremely scalable practice. One of the brilliant things about anchor point training is, for example, training seniors, which is how I got to know Dan and Cody, was how scalable it is. Whether you're doing suspension and able to work with just a little bit of resistance, or whether you're working with elastic resistance and you can add the resistance by moving relative to your anchor point. I have, over a period of 5 years, sort of broken this, simplified, if you will, the approach to anchor point training into 3 things you see in the slides here. The first is the anchor point itself. Where your anchor point is it high, is it low, is it medium height? Do you have more than one anchor point available to you? That is the first sort of element that dictates the work that you'll be able to do. Any one anchor point is going to be useful for a full workout. The second element is how you're connected to whatever tool it is that is anchored, right? Whether you're using a handle, whether you're using a strap, whether it's a prehensile or a non-prehensile grip. Is the force on the handle, is it balanced? Is it asymmetric? Is the force only on one end of the handle? All of those elements of connection, how you're connected to the force that you're working with, are very useful versatility, very accessible versatility, and something that you can also work with to progress your practice of anchor point training. The third element is the orientation to the anchor itself. Are you facing the anchor? Are you facing away from the anchor? Are you side on to the anchor? Are you in a square stance, an athletic stance? Are you lunging? Again, one of the great things about anchor point training when it comes to training seniors is the ability to use, for example, suspension straps to help balance, and then lunge in all kinds of different dimensions, so you can create all kinds of great work for the legs, but you've got the stability of the handles in suspension, so that people who are feeling that they're not confident lunging aggressively forward, backwards, to the side in complexes and things like that can do it and not worry so much about falling down. So lots of work to be done with the orientation to the anchor. So you've got 3 things: your anchor point, your connection to the anchor, and your orientation to the anchor. These are, I call these things the 3 external locus points, if you will. If you were to look at the summation of forces through the body, in the body, through any resisted range of motion, it's like a math formula. So the things that are not in the body, the things that are external to the body, are going to be the anchor point, your connection, and your orientation. So in a math formula, these 3 points are like external things as you move the resistance through a range of motion. Really a useful approach to look at those 3 things to see, oh, how can I progress? How do I make this scalable And so as I describe the practice, we have actually on the website an overview that you can download that talks about this in depth. You start to sort of see it from that perspective, and it becomes, you recognize how manageable and how versatile the practice is. I love it because it really allows me to create resistance in all kinds of different ranges of motion. It allows me to progress the movements I need. It gives me versatile types of resistance. I firmly believe that variety is the low-hanging fruit, if you will, of work. Work is diminishing returns. So when you want adaptation, new challenges are going to give you more demands for adaptation. So if you can find several different useful ranges of motion for pushing or pulling, and you work all of those, that's going to be more useful than doing just one pulling movement and doing a lot of it. All right, you're going to get more demand for adaptation, per rep, per minute of workout, if you've got variety intrinsic into your program. Obviously, repetition is important, particularly if you're learning a skill. But the big payoff for fitness, I think, optimal practice is about finding ways to create lots of variety that is complementary. And I've, in all the years of training and doing things, I've never found anything that comes close to anchor point training that can give you all kinds of dimensions of resistance, different types of resistance. It's portable. It's convenient. It's not expensive. It is really all about just learning how to do it. And once you have that, well, boy, you've got just so many possibilities. I've worked with a lot of interesting folks. You'll see in these next slides. When I started out, I was in Quebec. Worked with a great guy there, a guy named Steve Charbonneau, was a professional football player. He came and saw the ARC, which is this anchor system you see here, and loved it. Steve was a very well-respected professional football guy, had a big gym in Granby, Quebec, and so I started to train with him several times a week in the early days of working through all the different possibilities of how these tools work. I worked with a couple of companies who were making the bands and the straps for me, and it became apparent to me that I was going to need to make these things my own myself. So, I worked with football guys. I worked with hockey guys. Peter Twist, a really well-known Canadian trainer, really sort of made his mark training NHL hockey players. It was great there working with all his students. I worked as well, you'll see in some of these other slides here, worked at Concordia University, where they've got all kinds of different sports. Worked there primarily with rugby folks, but worked there with football guys as well. Actually showed them some interesting ideas for concussion prevention and knee injury prevention as well. I worked with a lot of folks in Montreal. It has a really big MMA scene. So I worked with a number of gyms there, trained with those guys. Worked with all across Quebec with fighters, mostly MMA guys, some boxers as well. I learned a few things about the specific needs. Virtually every innovation that has been developed in the tools that I've designed have come as a result of working with somebody who had a very specific need. So often, it's like, necessity is the mother of invention, and that is so true.
Chris, tell us, because I don't train MMA folks, obviously, as someone who focuses on functional aging, but tell us what kind of innovation you came up with in terms of the handle that impacts MMA folks, and I think it impacts other folks too. I see how it impacts aging clients, but I mean, just give us a quick example of that.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I realized was that, for example, fighters, boxers are always taping up their wrists, and so I created, as part of the design of the handle, using this long strap, the ability to create force asymmetrically at the handle, so that you could work the wrist back and forth by in any range of motion. You could have full flexion or extension of the wrist itself, because the resistance was only on one side of the handle. Uh, the long straps that I've designed as well are quite useful for putting the strap itself around the hand or the wrist for striking, so you're not striking with a handle in your hands. There
Okay.
are there are certain things, for example, in Muay Thai, they'd use a lot of knees and a lot of rotation, and so these these uh, these bands, for example, when we work on the high-low, you can see here with the high-low configuration of the band. Well, you can imagine, for example, training that strikes in all kinds of dimensions that way, using that configuration. Really interesting way to create resistance in a lot of, whether you're, throwing a hook or an uppercut or a cross or a jab.
So,
That type
so tell us how you go from MMA guys to ballerinas.
of I know, eh? How wonderful is that? That was my development all over. Was from hockey to MMA, and I met these guys. I did a trade show when I was first starting out in Toronto, and the head physiotherapist from the National Ballet came by the booth and said, I've got to have one of these anchor systems, which was what I had at the time. I didn't even have the force bands or the vector straps at this point, but they just wanted a really versatile anchor system to work with. So here's a thing that I learned. One of the ranges of motion that they needed to train, that they didn't really have the right gear to train, is when the male dancer picks up the ballerina and puts her overhead, right? You can imagine sometimes that's a real cross-body move, right? And he's picking her up. And so they need to be able to do that very fluidly, and they really didn't have resistance. Everything is gravity based. They're picking up and swinging around. Didn't quite give them that the type of torso and twisting and pulling and raising up and all at the same time. And they found, using resistance bands, that they could sort of move these ranges of motion resisted very fluidly. So that was one of the things that was interesting about working with those guys. And boy, didn't they look good on video? Way better than the MMA guys. Yeah, so that was a fascinating experience. They punish their bodies, the ballet folks. I mean, what they go through their feet. It's just a grueling art form. They spend 45 minutes warming up their legs before they even dance, on the bar. It's quite amazing, the regime that they have. This fellow Naughty is a somewhat controversial guy in the industry. Comes down pretty hard on CrossFit and other types of fitness that is very sagittal plane based. Based in San Diego. He's a very interesting guy. I've got a lot of time for him, even though he's a little abrasive at times. I really like him a lot because he really knows his stuff, and he's very much about training movements in a lot of dimensions, training the slings, if you will, training contralaterally. And he's certainly given me a lot of great ideas along the way, working with him. I find in fitness, everyone's got their own approach to some degree, and it depends on what markets they're in. There are so many markets, whether you're a power lifter guy or a bodybuilder or training seniors, or you've got a certain sport. And what I've seen is if people have certain success with an approach, then that becomes sometimes their approach, and no other approach is going to be as good. I'm sort of like that with anchor point training. You've got to go down. You've got to have a passion to go down it and do it to get really, really good at it. You've got to be highly, highly focused. These shots were from a couple of summers ago. I spent a summer just out on the beach, installed a couple of these arcs, and had a great time training out there. A little lifeguard tower you see in the corner there. I train out at that lifeguard tower virtually every morning now, down by the water. And I'm here to say I'm walking the walk of training anchor point training outside. It was a great experience training with these kids. I can remember that summer that I spent on the beach, just watching the kids get the gear that I designed, and then all of a sudden they would be doing all kinds of stuff with it that had, like, it wasn't designed for that. And you realize, of course, that's the nature of it, right? You know, you're going to make something and people are going to use it for reasons or ways that you just didn't know or expect or whatever, you know. I think there's a tremendous, we had a lot of fun with the slack line, actually. You know, made it very accessible by putting a second slack line above and a couple of handles. So you could, you know, and just about anybody could get up on the slack line and walk around and get you know, experience what it's like to sort of work with that type of balance demand, but, you know, but not fall off the line every 2 seconds, you know. So that was sort of fun.
I think it's safe to say that you have enjoyed the transition from Canada to California. Is that pretty?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not going back there for winter. I mean, I love Canada. You Canadians out there, but I love California. Boy, the thing that I love about California is you can train outdoors every day. You know. And that's for doing what I do, being able to train outdoors every day. Wow, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And anchor point training is cool in the sense. Here's something that we talk about a bit, and it's true. It's one thing you have to be aware of. Whatever surface you're working on is very fundamental when you're training on your feet. You know, if you've got a slippery floor, for example, you know, that's not necessarily going to be what the type of flooring you want when you're doing anchor point training. If you're outside on the grass and the grass is wet, be careful. You know, that slippery footing can mess you up doing certain exercises, particularly. The sand is awesome for anchor point training because you can really get, you know, great footing. You can dig right in you can get really extreme angles going on with your suspension training, right? So that the sand I find is really, really super. You know, if you're out on a field, for example, if you've got field athletes that wear cleats, soccer players, rugby players, football players, again, anchor point training is awesome because with your cleats on, you've got more purchase on the ground as well. So you can get a little more extreme in your angles, et cetera, et cetera. It's a great approach for group training. If there are any trainers on the page here, boy, this is a great way to do boot camp type training. You know, you can have a couple of sets of gear. The way we sell it now, I sell a suspension strap and a force band and an elastic band together in a package. You could train 4 people with one package, really. You know, the handles, the suspension handles. I do a lot of single handle work now in suspension and with elastic resistance. I find again, the single handle sort of creates an asymmetric force across my body. It's intrinsically contralateral, and so I think it's quite useful. You know, one arm push-up versus a 2-arm push-up, for example. I like that demand a lot. You know, same thing with a row. You know, just rowing yourself up with alternate hands. This wide handle you see here, you see that handle is about double width. Transfers very easily from one hand to another when you're working. So this makes this particular design very, very versatile in terms of switching from hand to hand, back and forth, sort of like a small trapeze, right?
Yeah, here's a shot of the bigger handle. I'm trying to find a shot of it.
There you go.
To me, that's one thing that's unique.
Well, the band. You see the band here. This is so the midpoint handle on the resistance band. This is like a high-low anchoring, right? And very easy to just sort of loop your handles, the handle end around a pole, and then take the midpoint of the band and put it on the pole, and then work with the midpoint handle on the force band. And this high-low resistance, boy, you can get a lot of great value out of that. I do a lot of circles from this rowing, where I'm doing backward circles and forward circles in that position, and I find that's quite interesting work compared to simply just pulling straight back. I mean, it's all good, right? But that's great variety. Had a friend of mine that sells stand-up paddleboards, and said, well, could we do this? They were doing yoga and Pilates on the out on the water, and I said, well, take a resistance band, loop it around the front of your board, and for sure you could add some anchor point training.
Yeah, you won't catch me doing that in Indiana anytime soon.
Well, maybe not in Indiana. But these things it turns out they're pretty stable, right? It's not that difficult to stand up on a stand-up paddleboard. We'll see about surfing. I think I'm living here. I really want to get into doing some of that kite surfing. That's a fabulous thing. Connection is the nature of things, right? In all regards, I guess. And I guess maybe I spend enough time on the beach, I start getting a little more philosophical about just what this is all about. For me, it really is about better as always possible. It's about creating the best tools, the smartest tools I can design, and teaching people best practices, how to use them. This long handle that we have now, it's even longer than one I had just a year ago. I do a certain amount of this serape work, I call it, where you're wrapping the handle, the strap around your shoulder. There's lots of interesting core work, if you will, or working these posterior and anterior slings of the body, where you take the limbs completely out of play. And it's, again, a different type of work. It's a useful variety. Do a certain amount, of course, started when I was playing rugby, when I was training for rugby in my 40s and 50s. I started to use bands for a bit of resisted running, particularly first step, sidestepping, first step quickness, which is, I never had great top end speed then. My legs are too short, but I was first 10 yards. That was my wheelhouse. Not even 10 yards. First 5 steps. So here I'm just demonstrating some of the different things you can use. This is using that asymmetric force at the handle, but you can see this is more sort of a baseball swing approach. Maybe you can train. Obviously, with the two-handed grip like that, again on that double handle, you can train baseball, tennis, lacrosse, golf, hockey. We have this great little wall anchor system that we just started working with as well. I mean, the Arc is definitely state-of-the-art in terms of an overhead, underfoot anchor system, very space-effective. This little wall anchor system here, even more space-effective. Doesn't quite give you everything the Arc does, but boy, oh boy, zero space. The thing you want, I mean, the trade-off is if you go with a wall anchor, the thing that you really are not going to have is the overhead anchor for your suspension work. Now, you can see the suspension straps work great here with a high anchor, but if you have the overhead anchor, there's just a few more things you can do. So it really is one of those choices if you want to have the full thing or not. We did filming here at the Fit Body Boot Camp. We've got a great program rolling out with these folks in August. And we used there a chin-up rack. We use that as the overhead anchor, and it worked really, really well. So and every situation is a little different. As long as the anchor itself is solid, that's really the first thing you need to have. And then once you have your solid anchor, then it's just a matter of knowing how to work. How to make the most out of the anchor itself, how to connect to that force in the most useful ways, and how to and then again, how to work your orientation, whether it's lunges or squats, or how to set yourself up so that you work different resisted ranges of motion and progress them as you go. Boy, I think this is pretty much the end of that actual presentation.
Yeah,
Got lots of,
yeah,
boy, it's a really deep rabbit hole, folks. There's just a lot to it. That's for sure.
Good intro, Chris. I think next time we have you back in the next month or two, we should probably dig deep into just exercise movements. We can spend the whole half hour just talking about push-pull combinations, presses and rows and those kinds of things. But I think this has been a good sampling for people to see that it's a very versatile tool. And I put your website up, anchorpointtraining.com, if people want to grab your Anchor Point training manual, because I know some people were probably just looking for, hey, I want 10 different exercises I can do with my clients. If that's what they're looking for, I think they go grab your manual. They'll find it, and I know you've got half a dozen videos on there, some even in my facility where you put Dawn through the rigors of all the different movements. So if people are looking for just movement demonstrations with force bands and suspension, there's tons of stuff on your website. So if you guys have any questions for Chris right now, we've still got about 30 people on here live. We'd love to take some of those. So go ahead and throw some questions at Chris. And certainly check out his website where you can see some video demos of exercise movements and grab his manual, which is free. Any closing thoughts, Chris? We'll give people a few minutes here to post questions, and then the recording will be available to all the people that registered for that as well. So,
well, boy, it's first of all, Dan, thanks so much for having me on. Everything is process. Getting ideas out to the world is exactly that. I'm going to be at IDEA, as you know, later this week, and I'm going to be talking to a lot of folks there. Now that the tools are actually commercially available, we've got a few pretty big clients. We're starting out with really sort of coming to this after so many years of development. I know a bunch of people in the industry, and I'm really glad to be stepping into the commercial end of this now at a pretty nice level, working with people who have got, really interesting facilities, a really interesting approach, put a tremendous amount of resources into the education program that we're working with the Fit Body Bootcamp folks with. We will soon have a certification as well, so that trainers can take Anchor Point training course with us, and we'll be able to get continuing education credits or CEUs as well. Expect at some point to be actually doing presentations at conferences like IDEA as well. Yeah, there are a lot of great specific things. I could see, for example, doing a sports-specific webinar where we talk specifically about concussion prevention protocols, knee injury prevention protocols, some ideas there, some performance ideas as well. That would be an interesting subject for a webinar for sure.
Okay, we got a good question here from Susan Brown that my hunch is if Susan's asking it, probably 20 other people are thinking it. She says, it's very interesting, but I need more on how that will work in my personal training business. I'm familiar with TRX straps, and I think this could be useful, but I need much more information. So again, Susan, I would recommend you start by going to anchorpointtraining.com, grab Chris's manual, and check out some of the videos. But Chris, how would you just briefly address how this will work in somebody's personal training business? I think you showed some pictures of one trainer that just installed it with her wall anchors and how it's impacted her business. Dina, I think it was.
Yeah. So if you've already got TRX gear, then you have you're already doing suspension training, Susan. Depending on what type of anchor system you've got, If you're using, the A-frame, that's
She
great.
she doesn't say she has TRX straps. She just says I am
Oh,
familiar with TRX straps,
oh, okay, gotcha.
and she's kind of
Well,
looking
okay,
she's kind of
so
looking for how it will work in her personal training business. So
super.
give
So
us.
you need a bit of floor space. For sure, a wall anchor is your simplest solution. Um, uh, and there are there are good solutions out there. The piece that I've used at Dina's facility is called a super strut. Um, you can get one there with the hooks on it and these really heavy duty uh, 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 plugs essentially that go into the wall that will anchor on drywall, or you can just lag screw into a stud. Uh, what I typically do is put 4 or 5 hooks in a vertical orientation, one at about 8 foot, another one just a little bit below that, another waist height, another one low. This allows you to configure the bands particularly any way you want and create the angle that you need. Obviously, your suspension strap is going to hook onto your high anchor. You need a bit of space around your anchor, in front of your anchor, basically, to work. I think anchor point training generally is really what's cool about it is when you're not using that gear, it doesn't take up any room, right? So when you bring it out, you use a bit of floor space. When you're not using it, you're not sacrificing any space to that doesn't stop you from doing a lot of other things in that same space as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would say to Susan, we have an arc in both of our training facilities, and there's really two simple things that I tell trainers is it's a simple piece that can replace a cable column, a Kaiser functional trainer because you can get the force band, but it also gives you the suspension element, and so it's really going to take the floor space of like a cable column machine, like a Kaiser functional trainer or a cable cross, and give you just far more versatility than those have, and so. I think the pictures that you showed, Chris, from Dina's installation, it's just another tool you have that simply hangs on the wall. When you're not using it, it doesn't take up any floor space, which is the beautiful thing. Because when you got a cable cross, a cable column, those things take up floor space when you're not using them. These things
yeah.
don't. So when you're using them, great. When you're not using them, they're out of the way. Um, Another question here from Aaron. Aaron asks a really nice question. How would you integrate anchor point training in a fall prevention program? And I'll take a crack at this first, Chris, and then you can answer.
Yeah.
A couple of things that we have used it immediately for are people that are having trouble getting out of a chair, having trouble with squatting, having trouble with lunges. The suspension strap gives them something to pull against, and so they can do an assisted squat, they can do an assisted lunge. Then as we get more advanced, like you saw some of the work that Chris was even doing in the pictures, you can loop the force band straps over their shoulders and have them do some resisted lunging, some resisted walking, some resisted marching, a lot of different movement patterns where they now have something pulling on them, tugging them. And we can do that sideways, forwards, backwards, in all different directions, right? So what's it feel like when somebody's pushing or pulling you around? What's it feel like when all of a sudden I give you more resistance that feels like it's going to pull you off balance? So there's a lot of kind of fun, useful things that we have seen that you can do. And Chris, what would you add to that?
Well, boy, I mean, you've got yeah, exactly everything you said. I think in the beginning, when somebody isn't feeling confident about their ability to squat and lunge and those things, particularly back lunges, people have trouble with stepping backwards. By putting the suspension straps in their hands, this now stabilizes them and gives them way more confidence. And so they can go deeper into lunges, they can come up from deeper, they can move from side to side. I even do a certain amount of just standing with the suspension straps in your hands. Now go up, now raise your knee and just stand on one leg, and now try that the other side. And again, you've totally nailed it with the suspension, with the elastic resistance straps. Not only can you sort of pull away with either the shoulder straps or a waist strap, but you can also be walking with that angle pulling you from the side. So you basically get perturbations, if you will, from all dimensions while you're still on the floor. You don't have to use a piece of stability gear or instability gear. But again, you could incorporate all that gear into anchor point training as well as a progression. So yeah, that's a great question, and I think it really is one of the things that's particularly well suited to the suspension and the bands is the scalability of it. It's not all about lots and lots of resistance and high numbers of reps, but very precise resistance that can either help you or challenge you.
Yeah, great. Well, those are great questions. Thanks for submitting those. Thanks to everybody that was on live with us, and for those of you listening to the recording, again, you can check out anchorpointtraining.com to get Chris's manual on anchor point training and all kinds of videos. If you're looking for an exercise library, this guy has it in terms of movements that I don't think I even knew existed, with resistance bands, suspension straps, and all sorts of things related to anchor point tools. So thanks again, Chris, for doing this. And if you're at IDEA in the next couple of days, definitely check out Chris at Anchor Point Training, or check out Cody at the Functional Aging Institute booth. So until next time, thanks everyone for listening.